This video is titled Engaging the Curriculum 2. In it we will cover Teaching for Understanding and the Goal of Transfer. What is the purpose of teaching and learning? The purpose is not merely rote memorization to succeed on standardized tests. The purpose is to develop meaningful understandings. Why? Because meaningful understandings become the foundation for future learning, critical thinking, creativity, reflective analysis, and real-life problem solving. Teaching for understanding requires careful planning. This planning may have already been done in the curriculum, textbook, or classroom. However, it is still helpful for parent teachers to be familiar with the process of developing curriculum for student understanding. One of the methods for developing curriculum for understanding is called backward design. Very simply, backward design first identifies desired results, second, determines the acceptable evidence of learning, and third, plans for the learning experience. Backward design begins with the end in mind. In other words, it starts with identifying the desired results, the goal of instruction. Let's look at the 3 stages of backward design. The first stage is to identify the desired results for the curriculum, the big ideas and important understandings. Remember that the brain looks for patterns and context for new learning. Keeping the big ideas and the important understandings at the forefront will help with student learning and assist the parent-teacher in emphasizing the most important parts of the curriculum. Well-designed curriculum presents new learning in a way that builds toward the desired goal. This avoids the trap of trying to cover everything within a curricular unit, in other words, a mile wide and an inch deep, and not spending enough time in specific areas with purposeful interaction to build meaningful understandings with long-term memory. The second stage is to determine the acceptable evidence of student learning. Quizzes, questions, problems, projects, or papers throughout the lessons and curricular units help to build and demonstrate the knowledge and skills the students should be mastering on their way to the overarching curricular goals. Performance tasks at the end of each curricular unit and at the completion of the curriculum demonstrate attaining the desired learning goals. Authentic performance tasks are what the student may encounter in applying new learning in real-life settings. The third stage of curriculum development is planning the student's learning experiences. This is done by organizing the learning materials and the learning activities. These learning activities build progressively toward attaining the curricular goals. Parents who use a commercial homeschool curriculum package or who have their students in a private or public school can utilize these principles to evaluate the curriculum and assist their students as needed. The reasons for the parent-teacher to approach teaching and learning through backward design is to help ensure that the big ideas and the important understandings are not lost in the process of working through the curriculum. Very simply, once the curriculum goal is identified and the way of demonstrating attainment of the goal is selected, the curriculum is assembled in logical order to lead the student step by step toward the goal of understanding with the ability to use the knowledge gained in real-life settings. While progressing through the curriculum, the student will be acquiring new knowledge, working with the knowledge and turning it into meaningful understandings, and then transferring these understandings to the ability to solve real-life problems. So what does transfer mean? Transfer refers to the ability to take the knowledge, skills, abilities, and attitudes learned in the classroom and apply them in real-life contexts. With practice, the students will be able to apply their learning in a variety of authentic settings. With the goal of transfer in mind, the curriculum should become a roadmap for the student in 1. Knowledge acquisition, 2. Developing meaningful understandings, and 3. Transferring or applying them in new and authentic contexts. Parent teachers should look for opportunities within the curriculum to cultivate transfer-level skills in their students by giving them time to work independently, think deeply and creatively, make new discoveries, and solve real-life problems. Each academic discipline has a few overarching long-term transfer goals. For example, a long-term transfer goal in mathematics is for students to be able to solve real-world problems on their own. A long-term goal in history might be for students to apply the lessons of history when considering contemporary issues. A long-term transfer goal for Bible studies would be to apply the teachings and lessons learned in real-life situations, in vocation, in relationships, and in the community. A long-term goal in civics might be to effectively engage as a Christian in the arena of local, state, or national government. Transfer goals have several distinguishing characteristics. They are long-term in nature, meaning they develop and deepen over time. They are performance-based. They require application, not simply recall. The application occurs in new settings, not ones previously taught or encountered. In other words, the task cannot be accomplished because of rote learning. The transfer requires a thoughtful assessment of which prior learning applies in the new setting. In other words, some strategic thinking is required, and not simply plugging in a skill or fact. The learners must apply their learning autonomously on their own, without coaching or excessive hand-holding by a teacher. Transfer calls for the use of habits of mind, in other words, good judgment, self-regulation, and persistence. Here are a few more examples of transfer goals. For economics, to make economically sound and ethical financial decisions. For history, to use knowledge and patterns of history to better understand the present and prepare for the future. For health, to make healthful choices and decisions regarding diet, exercise, stress management, and alcohol and drug use throughout one's life. For reading, to read and respond to text in various genres. For science, to have the ability to conduct a sound investigation to answer an empirical question. For communication, to effectively communicate for different purposes and varied audiences using appropriate media. For research, to locate and use pertinent information from varied sources, in other words, print, online, primary, and secondary. As a parent who is a teacher, you do not need to become an expert in curriculum design, but an educated user of curriculum, understanding the instructional goals and being able to assist your student toward those goals. And as a parent who is raising your children for God, you begin with the end in mind. What is the story God has for your children? How can everything they learn contribute towards God's plan for them? And how can the things they learn be used effectively and creatively in their area of service? Our overarching goal is raising good husbands and wives, good parents, and those who can be reformers, inventors, and revivalists, to equip them to gain understanding and the ability to transfer their learning to the issues they will confront and solve in the wisdom of God.